hosted at the University of Denver. It consisted of several different topical segments. As you know, for those of you who study political debates, you know that there's a lot of discussion about how the format affects what goes on. In this particular one, Jim Lara from PBS hosted it. He's hosted most televised presidential debates. They had 6 topical segments, 90-minute debate total. They had to eliminate the last one because they ran out of time. Here were the topics that were discussed. They had 3 segments on the economy, 1 segment on health care, 1 segment on the role of government, and then the final one, which was eliminated, was on the act of governing itself, okay, which is sort of a leadership question. Each segment, like I said, was 15 minutes long, and it started with Lara posing a question to a candidate and giving him 2 minutes to respond. And then for the next 13 minutes, the idea was there would be back and forth between the 2 candidates, and then they could pose follow-up questions to some of the comments that were made. Our unit of analysis was taken from Krippendorf's work on content analysis. We defined it as a propositional unit that took into account words, sets of words, phrases, sentences, and sets of sentences. Now, the difficult thing about this is because values are oftentimes implied, okay, or latent. They're not always obvious. So we developed a set of criteria to help us identify what some of these value premises were, and I'll just basically summarize this for you. One is we looked at things that would express or implicitly reference some kind of a value pattern or a value orientation. We also took into account positive or negative statements that seem to invoke a value structure. Specific references to concrete values, okay, images such as the U.S. Constitution, okay, or the United States flag. The omission of certain types of value claims and appeals. And the employment of narratives or metaphors or testimony that would espouse some kind of mainstream ideology or value pattern. We inductively, qualitatively coded for this. We took the transcript off the Commission of Presidential Debate website. It was about a 49-page transcript. We looked over Steele and Redding's original model, and if you'll take a look at the handout that I provided you, we list out for you all of the different value orientations that they cite in their work. And then we independently studied the transcript and coded for these things, gave it several critical readings, and any discrepancies that we came up with in the final analysis were resolved on a case-by-case basis. Now, so what did we find? Well, if you look at the table that I provided you on the other side, you get some sense of what was going on here. We found that Obama appealed most heavily to efficiency, practicality, and pragmatism. I'll give you some context for this in a second. Generosity, equality of opportunity, effort and optimism, and material comfort. Romney sought to identify himself with a rejection of authority, efficiency, practicality, and pragmatism, material comfort, and patriotism. Obama used a total of 7 different value appeals in this debate, and Romney used about 9. Now, just to give you some context for this, some holistic context, if you look at value appeals that Obama employed in this debate, and this is oftentimes the case with an incumbent, they have to come forth and they have to say, things are getting better. Okay, we have hope. You know, we've done a lot of work so far. Things are getting better. You've got to give us more time. Okay. And that was essentially what he tried to argue throughout the debate. So we talked about the hardworking middle class, that we've come in, we've tried to do things to support them. We've implemented a number of policies that are slowly taking effect. The economy is growing. It's not growing fast enough, but it's starting to grow, and we need to stay the course. So in looking at some of these values, he talked a lot about how his administration had made government more practical and efficient. And he made numerous references to this over and over and over again, particularly when it came to health care. Okay. In terms of being generous and considerate to others, he talked a lot, very openly, about the middle class and the things that his administration had done to support the middle class. In other words, we need to be caring and considerate of people, and we need to respond to what they're going through. Effort and optimism. He talked a lot about the effort and the optimistic nature of the American people, and how he thought that that was a strength, not a weakness, and that was something that we needed to build off of. And material comfort. In discussions of the economy, he talked a lot about what people were making, what they were able to afford. He talked about education and trying to provide opportunities for the middle class to go to college and pay for it. For Romney, rejection of authority became a staple of his approach. And most of these arguments came on the segment on health care. And if you'll look at the total, almost 44% of Romney's value appeals pertain to a rejection of authority. And it went sort of like this. Government's too big, it's too large, it's too vast. Government's inefficient. Obama's all about big government. So we have to oppose it. We have to try something else. Of course, he would try to make the arguments that many of the problems that we were going through now were being worsened by government action. And so if we could downsize government, it would actually, bring back the economy. The middle class would start to prosper. Too much regulation, too much red tape. With the notions of efficiency, practicality, and pragmatism, Romney would go back to his days as governor of Massachusetts, and he would talk a lot about what he did then. He basically said, I was a very efficient governor. My government worked quite well in Massachusetts. And I also was in charge of the Olympic Committee, and I did a great job there too. So everything that I do is efficient and practical, and that's a good thing. But then he would also argue it negatively and say Obama's government is not efficient and it is not practical. In other words, Obama doesn't have much common sense when it comes to government. He made a few comments that related to material comfort, and he did invoke patriotism several times, particularly toward the end of the debate. So that's what we found. Now, what does this mean in terms of implications? Well, there are several things here. I think number one is that in looking at this, and again, this is just a snapshot because we didn't look at the policy claims or arguments that were made. We're just looking primarily here at values. But one, I think that Romney did a nice job of tying the themes in this debate to the themes of his campaign at the time. So there was certainly a lot of reinforcement of what he was trying to do on a broader level. And if you think back through it, and I just sort of tried to take an opportunity to think through what kinds of things were we hearing out of the Romney campaign. And this is what we were hearing. We were saying Obama was too liberal and really lacked the common sense to deal with the country's problems. I mean, that's something that we heard over and over again. He doesn't have much executive experience. He was only a senator for a few years. Before that, he was a state senator. So he's not been in many executive positions. So he just doesn't know how to lead. Okay. The second one is that under Obama, government, again, has become too costly and intrusive. Okay. So we need to pull it back. We need to value the individual. We need to value individual rights. And we see government as an obstacle in maintaining and extending those freedoms. The next one, that Obama tends to put more faith in government than in people. Now, this is one that we've seen before. This is certainly not a new appeal. You go back historically, you see this, particularly in Ronald Reagan's debates, that, where do you put faith and hope? Do you put it in government or do you put it in people? And this was something that Romney tried to argue and intertwine throughout many of his campaign ads. And lastly, that Obamacare was a threat to personal freedom, and that he wanted, of course, to repeal it and replace it. Number two is that we hypothesized that even though Romney used more values overall, more value appeals, that his use of relatively straightforward and repetitive principles may have had a stronger residual effect on the viewing audience and may have contributed to this perception that he won. Okay. And for those of you that are debaters or former debaters, you sort of know this old notion of the spaghetti against the wall approach, that you just sort of throw everything out at the opponent and hope that something sticks. The reverse to that, of course, is that you try to find a couple of issues and drive them home. You just keep reinforcing them over and over again, hoping that at some level it will make sense and perhaps she'll get a vote out of it. And I think that's what Romney tried to do in this debate, is I think he tried to pick a sort of a cluster of values that were essentially conceptually reinforcing. And again, if you'll look at the list of values that he emphasized, you can see how they could be self-reinforcing. And it created a persuasive amplification effect. And it just seemed as though he was really emphasizing and honing in on this message that government is too big and that we've got to reject it. And he was able to do that through several different exchanges in the debate itself. So I think it just had a stronger residual message with the audience. To take a few simple points and just keep emphasizing them over and over and over again. Obama, I think, tried to appeal to too many different things. Okay? I do think that he was sincere in what he was saying. I'm not trying to call into question his credibility, but I don't know that he necessarily picked 2 or 3 values and said, these are things that I'm really going to try to emphasize in this debate. You know, sort of, it becomes a situation where you've got so much on your plate that you really can't enjoy any single item. And then finally, number 3 is that, and we know that incumbents have historically struggled in their first debate outing. And I don't know if you recall this, but the Republicans held like 11 primary debates in spring and summer. And Romney had a lot of debate practice. And Obama had not debated since 2008. So he may have struggled to answer complex themes in 2 or 3 minutes and didn't necessarily have the practice under his belt to really sort of hone in on some key ideas, some key themes like Romney had done and try to argue those persuasively. And many people said that about Obama. They felt that he seemed more like a law professor than he did a president, and would get into these really technical discussions of policy and sort of lose the point in doing so. Whereas, and what's interesting about it, an article came out this summer from Robert Rowland at the University of Kansas, where he did more of an in-depth argumentation type analysis of the entire debate, looking at all different types of appeals. He actually argues that when you look at argumentative form and structure, that Obama won the debate, that Obama made more solid arguments than Romney, okay? So that's just a different way of looking at it, that in terms of initiating a premise, developing evidence to extend that premise, and to tie it into a conclusion, he felt that Obama had more complete arguments than Romney. So that's just another point of view on it. Again, this is not nearly as comprehensive as that particular study here. We're just looking at value appeals. So, you know, it's a part of debate that I think a lot of times, particularly in political season, we tend to forget about. That, you know, the rhetoric is important, style is important, and we know that television has forever changed the nature of political debating. But it's still important, though, for us as communication scholars to look at the substance of these debates to see what exactly is going on. I think we can get swept away by the media coverage, too. The interesting thing about it, I watched the debate live, and my wife taught night class that night, and when she got home, I actually made her stay up, and we rewatched it that night. I said, this is just so bizarre. When I watched the debate the first time, I did feel like Romney made some pretty good points, but I thought that Obama had won the debate. Okay? That was my initial reaction to it. And then I watched the press coverage, and I thought, well, maybe I was just exhausted because everyone's telling me that Romney killed him. You know, and it's just like, so we watched it again, and after I watched it a second, I thought, you know, I can see this now. I mean, I can see where people would say that Romney put in a better debate performance. And then once we got into the transcript, and we ended up watching the debate probably 6 or 7 times, but Romney certainly did put in a stellar performance in that debate. But this is just another way of looking at it to see what kinds of things were going on there. And again, we would want to include other elements, other persuasive elements, before we would ever sort of present this elsewhere. Because, you know, values are important, and it gives us some signal as to what's going on, where the candidate is ideologically. But there's more to the story than just that. I mean, there's more to a good argument than just your value premise. So, Anyway, that's what we did, so thank you very much.